then it will take a few seconds for it to sync up with the YouTubes. But hello, everyone. I am Reija from the channel The Book Finch, and you are watching the Shorts and Sorcery Book Club live discussion of The Book of Dragons, edited by Jonathan Strahan. And I am joined by Joe from FinalBlowJoe. Hi, Joe. Would you introduce yourself and tell us what your channel is all about?
Hi, I'm Joe. As you can tell from my channel name, it's really quite obvious there. I am about 6% of what I read per year is science fiction. Although in the last year you wouldn't think it, considering it's been like probably 60% Terry Pratchett, but as the case may be. I read science fiction, fantasy, and few other genres mixed in there.
What's the most recent book aside from The Book of Dragons that you have read?
Well, the last one is a classic, The Chrysalids by John Wyndham.
Oh, I have that as well. I want to read that at some point. But yeah, I'm super happy that you are here with me to discuss this because, in case you don't know, Joe and I are actually friends. Like, we talk outside of BookTube as well. So, it's super nice to be able to chat with you in a more official capacity, if that makes sense. Yes, we've met. Hopefully we will meet this year again. But yeah. 2019 Worldcon was fun. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for this year. But first, The Book of Dragons, I read it on ebook. So I can show you my beautiful Kobo. This is the cover in glorious black and white. Illustrated by Rina Kai. The ebook actually also included the illustrations, which was super nice. But let's start with talking about the central themes, central story elements that we picked up that were kind of continuous in, if not all of the stories, then most of the stories. As you might figure out from the title and the cover, this book is all about stories relating to dragons and dragon myths from around the world. Basically a collection of different authors coming together and basically telling a story of their own imagining what a perfect dragon story would look like for them. And for me personally, one of the core themes that I found in the book was the concept of family and this idea that there are different ways to be a family. I noticed that was a theme that was running around in most of the stories.
Yeah, I mean, to me, as well, the other thing as far as family was concerned was all the stories, even the ones that didn't involve physical dragons, even the ones with like the concept of dragons, it's just how dragons fitted into our world now or in the past, and how obviously some of them were slightly more futuristic, and how they, even more so than dragons, it's like going beyond dragons. How do myths like dragons work within our society? Would they work? Could they work? Sort of, and what do they do for society? Do we need that concept of dragons?
Yeah, exactly. What does the concept of dragons bring out in humanity, and what does it tell about humanity? Because all of these different myths of fantasy are basically just extensions of the human experience in a way. So yeah, I would also say that another thing, as the myth of dragon, the concept of family, one thing was also the concept of responsibility that I noticed in a lot of the stories. There were a lot of stories where either the dragon was the creature that needed to take responsibility, or there were people around that were hurting a dragon or somehow causing it to rampage that needed to take responsibility for their own action. There was a bunch of like interesting climate fiction as well when it came to the dragon myth. So I thought that it was definitely very interesting in that sense. Do you think that this anthology succeeded in what it was doing, bringing forth different stories surrounding dragons? Did it meet your expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. I mean, literally, I bought it because of Kelsey's fantastic read. Her enthusiasm start of last year, I believe it was, made me wonder what it was, so I bought it. And I mean, for the record, the coincidental me buying it last year and then you choosing it for this book club was like, really? I was like, I've got that over there. Yeah, it did work though. Yeah, it just worked to sort of bring out some of the stories. I mean, as always with these collections, and especially when you're talking about multiple author collections, you know, some of them worked, some of them didn't, but overall, it was an effective collection and did what I think the editor, Jonathan, said. His theme was obviously a particular one. I think he curated the stories enough to get the right ones in it. As editors, obviously, that's what they try to do.
Yes. Also, this collection included poetry in it. And I think that we could go over a little bit about what we thought of the poems and did they work for us. First of all, Joe, are you a fan of poetry? Do you read a lot of poetry normally?
No. If anybody knows about my channel, I mean, I literally say I don't get poetry. I've tried, and I do read a small amount per year, a very small amount, and it almost never works for me. I never understand what is trying to be said in poetry. So the ones in this were just like interesting imagery. That's it.
I read some contemporary poetry. I read like classic poetry. For example, John Keats is a poet that I really like, but it's like I don't necessarily require the poem to have a story, but I do like want it to have like a pinpointable emotion, like that I can grab hold onto and like I can relate to. And for me, a lot of these poems were playing with imagery, but didn't necessarily convey a sort of emotion that I could relate to, if that makes sense. My favorite poem was actually A Final Night to Her Love and Foe by Amal El-Motar, because I felt like that was sort of the emotional core of that poem was a feeling of nostalgia, because she was sort of evoking this idea of different dragon stories, how different dragon myths are. Like if it's a dragon that's a villain, or a dragon who is a deity who brings life and stuff like that. So in that sense, I felt like, you know, there was this sort of idea of childish nostalgia that I was feeling reading that poem, because I was like, yes, I recognize all of these concepts, all of these stories are something that I have read. So that was a very nice one. But other than that, I didn't think they were very memorable.
Yeah,
like probably the other one that I liked would have been Nidhogg by Joe Welton, but that is basically because it's just a sort of poetical retelling of a Norse myth.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Yeah, about the like Nidhogg gnawing on the roots of the world tree, and but that's basically sort of like the hard part of the work has already been done, because you're taking a myth and basically sort of repurposing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could have done with or without the poems. I think it's great that more poems are included in like talks about genre fiction and stuff. I think that it's sort of like an unexplored territory when it comes to genre writing. But I also probably, if the poems would have been axed from the collection, I don't think I would have been unhappy either, because
No.
for me they didn't really add anything specific.
No, I just thought read them and I thought, interesting enough. Move on.
Yeah, but it was nice when they came up. I was like, oh, a poem, and then I was more focused on the other story. I think because they were sandwiched in between the longer stories, that made them easier to forget. So I think they either should have been like a completely separate poetry collection, like a different book even maybe, or they could have had their own section either at the beginning or the end. So that way they could have shown a little bit more.
Yeah.
Then we could talk a little bit about stories that did not work for us. I always like to talk about the ones that I necessarily didn't like first, and then end on a sort of high note by talking about the ones that I liked the most. So I think we could go over like 5 stories each, depending on if we have the same ones. So do you want to start? What was one story that was like a little bit of a head scratcher for you?
Hang on. Well, the one that comes to mind, just quickly looking down the list, is A Whisper to Blue by Ken Liu.
That was a little strange.
It's one of the few that I'm beating it up because actually I can't remember it that well. It was to do with the dragons entering society, and the structure was strange, weren't it? It was like you had like almost like newspaper articles, or was it meant to be like TV sections or something?
Yeah, it's like sort of like a documentary, or a journalistic piece. We're not really sure because the journalist is never really a character. It's like the people who are being interviewed are characters, and there's definitely someone they're talking to, but that person isn't ever at the forefront or doesn't really have their own narrative arc, which made it a little bit strange. Also, it's like alternative history, but it also like jumps around a bit in time, so you're not really sure, like, okay, is this normal that the dragons are coming to this town, this small town? That has this happened before in other towns? Oh, the dragons have been around since like at least 1700s or something. It's like it jumped around a lot. I also thought that it wasn't the strongest story for me personally. It was kind of like it didn't really have a solid like central structure, like where you could pinpoint exactly like, okay, this is the core element that I need to focus on. It was kind of like haphazard in its structure. I still think that the prose itself was very good. Like Ken Liu has a way with words, and I definitely I think I would have been more interested if he'd chosen a specific point in time and focused on that point and made a story about how dragons elevated that society or like that historical like moment in time. Now that it was sort of like trying to do everything at once, it was kind of like, oh, wait, what?
That's actually just literally what I was just thinking then. It's like alternative history, but with only glimpses of bits of history here and there.
Yeah.
Not, there's alternative history of this time, this.
Yeah, it was like I remember when I was reading
backwards in the same timeline, it would have made sense. But it's almost like you jump forward in this timeline and jump forward in a slightly similar timeline. It was.
Yeah, and it's like we're not actually really sure if the timeline that the interviews were taking place, if it was in like a very distant future or like near future or present time. That's never really made too clear.
Yeah.
So there's not really an anchoring point where you're like, okay, I can see how this relates to these other events. And also I was like, well, oh, you mentioned the Warsaw Pact, you mentioned the like Edison and Tesla at one point. I want to know about those, like I want to know about Edison and Tesla and their rivalry and dragons. Like, like you tease with these like things, and then you don't give anything about that except a little tiny tidbit. So it was kind of like frustrating. My like personal, like what a story that I didn't quite get was The Last Hunt by Aliette de Bourdard. And this is not the first time that I feel like I'm struggling with an Aliette de Bourdard story. I feel like as I'm reading her short stories and stuff, I'm slowly realizing that she just may not be an author for me. Like, first of all, I'm not sure if this story was science fiction or fantasy. There isn't a clear sense of place.
Yeah.
Where this takes place. Is this Earth? Is this a colonized planet somewhere? Like, where are we? When are we? What is going on? Who are the masters? Are there aliens? Are they, like, what is this? Is this a metaphor for colonization? What's going on? And even though there are a lot of references to other characters who are emotionally who are at the center of our main character's emotional core and emotional, like, what's the word, like network, basically. Like, she references a daughter, she references a sort of aunt, but we never see them, so we don't actually get to witness what the relationship between them actually is and what that means for her. We only have her saying something to the effect that, well, she loves her daughter, she wants, like,
Yeah.
And yeah, so that one was just puzzling to me. I was like, I'm not sure what is happening.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have great memories of that one, so obviously it didn't work as well for me either, because otherwise I would have remembered it stronger.
Yeah, I read it just today, like earlier today, and I'm already struggling to remember what it was like, because I finished the book just like a few hours ago, and yeah, that was just like, wait, what? I am confused. So I don't have many things to say about it. So you can share your next one.
I mean, there wasn't many. To be honest, there weren't many that I thought was bad as such. I mean, basically, it was the poetry wouldn't work, and there's one or two short stories. The one that I thought I like the concept of. Oh, I like the concept of, but it bit of an odd one to fit in. I thought was Uli by Daniel Abraham. You know, the former mercenary looking after his grandson, and now he's going to be maybe pulled back into the world, and you know, he's going to playing Dungeons and Dragons. I mean,
I think actually the best parts of that story were the Dungeons and Dragons sections, which were used as a sort of bridging of actual events happening to Yuli.
Yeah,
like, those were the most interesting bits, but every time I had to hear about Yuli, I was like, it's just too much sort of like this machismo. Like, I just, like, remember those movies in the 90s, like, starring Harrison Ford and Arnold Schwarzenegger, that always had that strong character that could do anything, like, and Die Hard and stuff, where you can just figure every problem you have out with a gun? This is what that reminded me of, and I grew out of those in the early 2000s. So it's like, wasn't like my favorite character.
Yeah, it was just simple. I mean, it was well written. But...
Yeah. I think the writing aspect actually wasn't like this collection, like, as a whole, for me, like, this anthology was a very strong anthology, I think. In terms of writing quality. Like, I didn't have a single story where I was like, well, this is clearly badly written, or could have used some more time in the edits. I think that each of the authors, even with the stories that I personally did not gel with, the author clearly had a vision of a story that they wanted to tell. And they executed. It's just that sometimes that execution doesn't work with a specific type of reader. So yeah, Yuli was definitely like it. Also, it was one of those stories that, was there a dragon though?
Yeah.
The dragon was in the inside of you all along. Like, I wanted an actual dragon though.
Yeah, no. I mean, I was expecting him to be somehow like, like a dragon in skies, or
I was expecting him to like change
or something.
What could have been? Another one, speaking of a story that did not actually have a proper dragon, was Matriculation by L. Catherine White, which had the glorious concept of blood as a currency and the whole vampire underground, like people selling their lives' blood for various services and stuff. That was interesting. But the dragon was a fake dragon. It was essentially a BMW dressed as a dragon.
Well, it was steampunk dragon though.
Yeah, well, but I want my dragons to have like a personality and spirit of their own. This one was just like a mecha story.
Yeah, I mean, it was, to me, it was interesting because of the steampunk dragon. I was starting off as the first story with a steampunk dragon was a curious choice. So I think that I wonder if that was the purpose of it. Maybe that's why you chose this story as the first story. Not an actual real fire breathing one, but steampunk with the blood price.
Yeah, this one, and also like the main character has an emotional connect. Like, this is another story that had a real point about family in the story. Like the dragon, like the mechanical dragon was the last piece that the main character had of their family. Like that connection to a missing family member. And so that it was the emotional through line about her connection to the dragon and what happened to it and stuff. So it wasn't a bad story, but I was just like, well, at the start, I was expecting us to go big with the dragons. And then it was just like, well, it's a kind of dragon.
Yeah. I mean, when it spent quite a bit of the story, the dragon did, where she got down on the dragon and she's like, oh yeah, just stand on the edge of the roof there whilst I go in the building and talk to people. It's like,
yeah.
The combination was interesting enough, but when your dragon is literally putting essentially the equivalent of a bicycle stand.
I know. It was basically like, imagine me putting my laptop to sleep while I go get coffee at the vending machine. Like, that's what it reminded me of. Do you have other stories that you think were like, did that work for you, or do you want to move on to like the ones that we actually really did like?
No, I don't think any over that really I thought was that stood out as far as being oddly placed to anything.
Okay, let's move on to favorite stories, because I don't think that there is point to like trying to nitpick on stories like just to reach a quota. I think I have already said my piece about the kind of stories that did not work for me. So let's move on to favorite stories, and we can just go over like some of the stories that were our favorites. I can start by saying that Where the River Turns to Concrete by Brooke Bolander was one of the standouts for me. Like, this is actually kind of like does the thing that Yuli by Daniel Abraham tries to do, but involves an actual dragon and does it better. It kind of reminded me of Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away in terms of like this dragon trapped in a contract, but also bring in gangsters. It was so good. I liked it so much. And this is the second thing I've ever read by Brooke Bolander. I have read the novelette she made about the elephants.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it.
The name is long. I mean, I can just look it up. Let's see. But that story was so nice. The only harmless great thing was the novelette that I really liked, and it was one of my favorite books of the year when I read it. But yeah, this is like I just need to read more from Brooke Bolander, because this was great. It had like good characterization. It had like it was playing with timelines, but doing it really like cohesively. Like you immediately know that, okay, like this is kind of leading up to this moment. It was kind of building tension in a really good way. I really liked it.
Yeah, I mean, and it brings out that sort of, redemption type idea, of course.
Yeah.
With him, and both as what he was and what he is now as, this sort of dubious sort of criminal lifestyle.
Yeah, and I also kind of like the love story that he develops with this single parent, and how that is connected, and also these subtle like magical abilities that other characters in the story have. Like clearly this is a sort of, this is set in our world, but kind of like a little bit enhanced with sort of like an underground magic scene. I would be really interested to like read more about the world in this. For example, the witch character was interesting in this story. Do you have a distinct like story that stood out as a favorite?
I mean, one of the ones would be well, which one should I mention first? There's two actually. There's two that, and they're both fairly recently read. I'll go for. I know. La Vitesse.
La Vitesse.
By Kelly Robson.
That I like that as well.
I like that one because obviously, it's the mother and wayward daughter, and them literally on a school bus, and they get attacked by a dragon, which.
It kind of reminded me of have you seen Speed starring Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock?
Of course.
It was like that, but a school bus, and the villain is a dragon. It was actually kind of neat. I thought that story had a really interesting like way it was building the character of the mother.
Yeah.
About her history. It was actually kind of tragic to read about her, like how she has reached this point in her life, and what has happened to her in the past. if I had something that I wanted more out of the story, it would have been that the character of the daughter starts out as one thing and ends the story as the same thing. So I would have wanted more like leaps and valleys with her character. But as I'm saying this, I also realized that, I also recognized that it wasn't about the daughter.
Yeah.
The daughter is just a means to an end, basically, because the story, the emotional core of the story is the mother.
And her journey as a mother and evolving in that role.
Yeah, and her journey as a mother also, like, evolving in the role of a mother and also allowing her daughter to have agency and make decisions of her own and trusting that her daughter can make the right decisions. So yeah, I also thought that this was a nice story. This was actually the first thing I have ever read from Kelly Robson. I want to read of Gods and Monsters and the Lucky Peach at one point, but I haven't. But I want to, and now that I have read this, I want to even more.
It's good, by the way.
I have had you and Rachel and other people talk about how good it is. So I just need to get to it. And now that I know how Kelly Robson writes, I actually I'm even like, this is what I like about anthologies. They get you hyped for an author in a short amount of time. One of the stories that I really liked was The Long Walk by Kate Elliott, and this was also the first time I've read something by Kate Elliott, as far as I know, and I really like this. This had a lot of things that I love. First of all, an older female character who is a mother and also a grandmother, and like, and how she views the world, having like grown up kind of working class and then moving up in the world, sort of like living for others, not herself. Yeah. So I really liked her character and how her characterization was done in a really short time. It was neat.
Yeah, I knew you'd like this one. As soon as I read this, I was like, Reija will be very enthusiastic about this one, because this is the older female character, and the way the society was developed in such a way. It's like, yes, she's valuable up until, so I guess, this age, you're not that useful anymore. Go and die.
Yeah, and it's actually like, it's actually a really, like, if you think about it, this idea of like discarding older people as soon as you're of the childbearing age and you can no longer walk the stairs, and like people need to take care of you, then you're expendable. Then you will have to do the last bit of burden and go on the long walk and be fodder. Yeah, so that
they've got no value.
Yeah, and I thought that was actually really relevant of how we actually, even though this is sort of like in a fantasy world taking place in a sort of like, well, they have the printing press and stuff, but like in a kind of like a like pre-modern era, like let's say like early industrial, like 17th century-ish type setting. It's still very relevant to how we kind of treat older people in real life, like sort of like crank them up into a home and sort of like don't see them and don't hear about them, and sort of like out of presence, out of mind, so to speak. Yeah. So I thought that was really relevant theming about how we view older people and how we value members of our society, especially female members of society.
Yeah.
Because there's like that moment where they're like, well, they don't take old men to the long walk. And I also really liked how this story brings in the dragons.
Yeah.
Because this is another one that had like, dragons are definitely a presence, but they're very subtle presence up until the end.
Yeah, I like that. It's like you're reading and you're like, when is the dragons exactly going to come back? You know they've got to drop at some point into the story somewhere, but it's like, where are they going to go? Is it just going to be? I mean, it can't be just a case of her on the long walk and then the dragon literally eats her. I mean, that's not exactly very effective.
Also, I think that it was nice that it from the first moment, almost from the first page of the story, there was like, oh, this world has demons and dragons, and we've just learned to live with it,
Yeah.
So it's nice, like a sort of like, this is a world that deals with this as a given. This is like every day. I would be interested to read more stories set in this world. Maybe not necessarily, like, for example, I'm interested in the militia fighting the demons that was talked about, like where the main character's son has gone. Like that would be an interesting beginning for like another story set in this world. But yeah, I think that's actually sort of like, that the story has done its job and enticed you when you start thinking about other possibilities, like where other stories could be set in that world, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Do you have another one that you liked, that did something that really was interesting to you?
When I mentioned before, I said I was choosing between two. The second one I was going to choose was that one. So another one though that feel about it though was interesting was Camouflage by Patricia Mckillip.
Ah, yes.
Which I like that also because most of these are either in the real world or fantasy. This is science fiction dragons, which
there was actually a bunch of science fiction dragons in this, which I really
I know, but this one was like very
interested.
like very obvious about it.
This was also another, like, I have heard Kelsey from the Fancy Hat Lady Reads talk about Patricia Mckillip until the cows come home, but this was the first story that I have ever read by Patricia Mckillip, and it's interesting because I associate her with fantasy and with like sort of like fairy tale-ish like stories, and this was not what I was expecting when I saw her name in the roster.
Yeah, I mean, I've read, because of Kelsey, I've read quite a few Mckillip now. I've read like 6 maybe at this point, and although it's not quite like any of others, her books are always a little bit alternative. You think it's going to be traditional fantasy or fairy tale retelling, and it is, but not entirely. It's always slightly skewed at an angle that you don't entirely expect. And I feel like with this was that as well. With a wizard doing his training and then he doing his wizard exam, and he ended up going maybe back in time, or
I mean,
it's never exactly explained, or even on purpose.
I also probably personally wouldn't have chosen this to be my favorite story, just because this was a story that I felt like was very cerebral. Like I'm still not quite sure if I fully understood it, if that makes sense. But I thought that it was very well written, and I want to read more by Mckillip, because if this is the kind of caliber of writing that she does, she has this sort of like playful way with words, if that, like, kind of like you said, alternative, like she has this concept and you're like, okay, I think I'm familiar with this concept, but then she sort of turns it around and does something else with it, which was kind of intriguing. Speaking of science fiction, I actually really liked The Exile by Neon Yang. which was about terraforming with a dragon deity. And I thought that just that concept about you bring a dragon that's a sort of like god to a planet, and the dragon will terraform it for you.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool. Like I have not heard of, like I have not even thought about that as a possible concept, but now I'm like, well, yes, this is like the perfect way to blend science fiction and fantasy, is like have this sort of fantastical concept and then bring it over to a science fiction lens. I really enjoyed it. It was a little bit of a bummer in terms of like emotion.
Yeah.
The way it ends is kind of like,
you want more for the character, and you almost want more for the dragons. Like the dragons just stuck on a planet for what, first time, or until they're ready for the planet, and then what they're going to do, come down and either kill the dragon or just put it in a packing kite and like a stray dog and just ship it off.
Yeah, it's like,
I mean,
like I liked the concept and I liked the writing, but if I have to compare this to like, for example, The Last Walk, or rather The Long Walk, I thought that it was exciting, and I want to read more set in this world, like maybe even about the whole terraforming process and the terraformers and the priesthood that does the thing. But in terms of like characterization and like the emotional journey that we went on, this wasn't really like something that was satisfying. Like I am in love with the concept and the premise, but the way the character starts versus the way they end, it just doesn't really take you on a satisfactory journey and a satisfactory narrative arc. Even though otherwise it was great. Yeah. I mean, I like Neon Yang as a writer. I think they are doing like super cool things with their world building. Like they always have very interesting concepts. For example, they're like Tenseret novellas, of which I have read the first two. Like they have really interesting like ideas. But I'm also like, sometimes they're a little like, they're not necessarily executed in the most polished way, but I'm always like really excited about what they're coming up with. So yeah, I like that one. Do you have another story that would pop into your mind, or might I go with the next one?
The only last thing I want to mention is, and this be a short one because it's quite a fast story, was Lucky's Dragon by Kelly Barnhill.
Yeah, it was interesting because I feel like it was kind of middle grade in like all of these other stories were kind of adult, geared towards an adult demographic, and I feel like Lucky's Dragon was more like a middle grade, which would make sense because Kelly Barnhill is a middle grade author. Most of the time.
She's the only author that I do not know at all. So
yeah, I haven't read anything by her before, but I know of her. I know of her previous work, and now that I've read the like Lucky's Dragon, I want to read the previous book she wrote, because I liked the idea, like the mad scientist character.
Yeah.
This is definitely Earth. We're definitely people.
Yeah.
It had like sort of like a sense of humor that I kind of associate with Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett. This kind of like childish humor that is kind of like it. What's the word? It has that childish whimsy in its tone, but it isn't talking down like it's still sort of like smart and adultish humor, but it's kind of like has that whimsy. Like I felt that the tone of this story had that similar kind of vibe, like a Pratchett or an Adams book, where even though it's geared towards a certain audience, it kind of bridges demographics where more people could enjoy it. Like for example, Pratchett wrote for adults, but children could enjoy his books. And I feel like this is another thing where Barnhill is like writes for children, but this is definitely something that kind of would tickle adults as well. Yeah, I like this a lot. Like there were some bits that could have been polished a bit more, like the thing with the teacher. Like I don't think that was foreshadowed enough, the end reveal and stuff. But other than that, I was smiling when I was reading this story. Like I was on my commute and I was reading this. And
What do you think of? I haven't watched it, and I can't even remember the name of it. That Pixar movie, about 4 years ago, where it was there's like little the emotions in the person's brain are like little people.
Inside Out.
That's the one. I haven't even watched it, but I've seen the trailers of it, and this made me think of that, like with a dragon as that internal.
I see what you mean. Another one that brings to mind is the oh my god, brain, don't lose the thread. There is another like Pixar movie that I'm thinking about that I watched recently. That's an older one. I think it came around the same time, or was it like right after WALL-E? So it's an older one. But yeah, I just generally feel like this felt like a Pixar Disney animated movie, but in like short story form. Like you have the wacky mentor / humorous side character. You have the main character who kind of feels out of place, but also like wants to connect with others, and then you have this cataclysmic like starting event that creates the dragon. It's like it really could work as a sort of like I could see this as a Disney movie. There's actually there's coming now the movie where that girl transforms into a red panda. That's coming out like in a couple of months or something from Disney. I think it's just called Red. So yeah, this was fun. This was just pure fun for me.
Very much so.
I wonder if I have other one that I could talk. I think Horde by Seanan Mcguire was actually pretty good. Like it was short, and it ended kind of abruptly. But I thought that it was nice that the horde of the dragon was basically foster kids that she was preparing for the future.
Yeah,
I thought that was a fun little story. I've kind of been sort of Seanan Mcguire is an author that's been definitely very overhyped for me because she's just so prolific, and I just haven't personally gotten into her stories. Like I have tried to read the Wayward Children stories, and they haven't really worked for me that well. But this one was actually very nice. I really liked it.
Yeah, it's just a fun little story, toward the end. Well,
and also it has some interesting like commentary on the actual foster care system.
Yeah,
that's like actually pretty thoughtfully done. So I thought that it was really nice. So I think we are about ready for our concluding thoughts about this. Like, how would you say your overall reading experience was with this?
I overall, I really liked it. I mean, I'm definitely glad that I got it last year because, I mean, there's a few that didn't work as well, but unusually, with especially when it's multi-author collections, it's usually not as successful as this one. Actually, this was probably, there's only a few stories in this that I thought was whatever. I wouldn't have noticed if they weren't there, but this was definitely kind of a good varied collection.
Yeah, I would say that as far as collections go, this was actually like very balanced. I think like all of the ones that I wasn't really gelling with were at the beginning, and it was kind of like
next time.
It was kind of like getting better as it went. Like the collection was definitely finding its voice, and sort of like the stories were getting progressively better. And even the ones that I didn't end up liking that were towards the end were like, they weren't bad stories. They were just something that they didn't like work for me personally. So yeah, I thought that this was a very good anthology. Like, I feel like with anthologies, there's always going to be some stories that you're just not gonna gel with because like there's so many, and also you kind of have to shift your thought process a little bit because you're sort of shifting from one story to a completely different one in the span of one book multiple times. So it kind of keeps you on your toes in a sense.
Yeah.
So before we go, I was thinking that we could do a little bit of like recommendations to other books or other media. What would you recommend? Can be movies, can be books, can be video games. Like if you like the Book of Dragons or the premise of the Book of Dragons, what would you recommend for people to pick up?
Ooh, this is a difficult one, actually.
Yeah, I always ask the difficult questions.
But I'll say it depends on what you're taking from it. Like, are you taking the more the sort of social, political type aspects, which there's definitely some of them. Are they the things that you're noticing more? In which case, you could go a certain way, or would you go, or the humour, which is definitely going in several other ways. So it's, the other that I would personally stand out to me at the moment, just because of what I've personally read in recent times, is the one by Habitat by KJ Parker, because I've got, it also goes by Tumult. I've got a pile of his books literally there as Tumult, and I've read several of his KJ Parker ones now, and he's an author that works for me. So his other works, as Tumult there, if you like the more rather more bizarre and sort of fantasy in this, humor in this, I should say, then maybe try something by him.
I have two. The one is a classic, actually, and that is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Like, if you want like a general like story with a dragon, you can't go wrong with The Hobbit. I think that's basically a given, a classic. In fact, it was referenced in the foreword to this whole anthology. Another one I would recommend is actually not A Song of Ice and Fire, but Ice Dragon by George R.R. Martin, which is a really like short, sort of like a fairy tale type story, kind of sort of set in the world of Song of Ice and Fire, but also standing on its own. It is basically an anti-war story, and it features an ice dragon. and also like an army that has like a dragon riding like cavalry. So and it is the illustrated version by Luis Royo is like pretty cool. So those are the ones I would recommend. There's also, if you want to look at other media, The Dragon Prince, which is made by some of the same people who worked on Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think currently has like 2 or 3 seasons. That's actually a really nice series. Has some deaf representation and stuff. So those would be my recommendations. And Joe, what is coming up on your channel? Like, do you want to plug some stuff you're up to?
Well, I'm working my way steadily. People will be so bored by now by seeing Discord reviews on my channel.
They're gonna do well in the long run.
Yeah, I know. Literally, my channel since last January, my channel has been dominated by Discord reviews. I mean, I'm working my way through reviewing every single Discord novel. No, not just Discord. I'm going to talk about and review the other collections like the Carpet People and Bromeliad's trilogy and them ones. There's the other video that I need to do. I've got the notes ready though. Is the video that you tagged me in, and the one also that Rachel tagged me in as well. So I've got 2 tags too.
I also have a couple tag videos coming up. One of them, I think, is one Rachel tagged me in. I think.
But yeah, she tagged us both in the same one, I think.
Yes, I think we're talking the buddy read tag, I think. Yeah. I have that coming up as well as the January reading wrap-up, which also has given me a little bit of trouble because I wasn't reading a lot of books. I was reading webtoons, and now I have a problem with my spreadsheet because I need to figure out a way I can calculate my webtoon reading into my spreadsheet, but because they're like single chapters that come up in a week, and other times I've read like 18 of a particular webtoon and 157 of another webtoon, they don't quite what's the length like. But yeah, I should try to figure out how I'm gonna categorize them in a spreadsheet, because it annoys me that I can't really like put them up on Goodreads or anything, but it's still reading. I'm still reading. It's just a different format.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. It's hard. It's difficult. But yeah, thank you for joining me for this discussion. It was a pleasure to discuss this book with you, and thank you for that. And I will see you in another live show next month. We will be talking about Fire Magazine issue 20, and I will be joined by another co-host who is as of yet to be announced. But thank you for joining us. If you are watching this later, leave a comment down. Leave a comment. Just leave a comment down in the description. No, just leave a comment, and talk to us down in the comments, and I will be sure to reply. And see you around. Bye-bye.